Welcome to Expressions of Leadership. I'm your host, Michele Kawamoto Perry. In every episode, we explore how people from educators and artists to executives and entrepreneurs lead with authenticity, rise through adversity, and share the wisdom they've gained along the way. Today's guest brings a unique blend of curiosity, creativity, and insight to everything he does. Marc Engel is a qualitative researcher, strategist, facilitator, and if that weren't enough, he's also a law school graduate, a guest lecturer at top universities like Stanford and Cornell, a trained comic who shared the stage with the likes of Shelley Berman and Kristen Wiig, and a pioneer in improvisational co-creation. Marc has helped the world's biggest brands understand what people think, feel, and need, often before they even know it themselves. He's conducted thousands of interviews, led innovative sessions using humor and storytelling, and co-created methods like out-of-focus groups and blocks and clay to spark real human-centered insight. Marc, I'm thrilled to have you with us on Expressions of Leadership.
Thank you very much. Very, very kind. And I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for including me.
Well, let's begin with your story. You describe yourself as a mutt with a career that spans comedy, improv, law, public relations, writing, and research. How did all of that come together?
The summer after my freshman year of college, I had an internship with a market research firm in Rochester, New York, my hometown. And that same summer, I decided to do an open mic night at the Funny Bone Comedy Club. And comedy was really hot in the late 80s. I just dated myself. I was 3. And so I pulled together an act and did a couple open mics over that summer. And then I continued that through college. It really sparked. And I had that same internship in research also throughout that whole time in college as well, like on holiday breaks and summers. So the kind of this duality going on of the analytical side and the creative side, and those are both part of who I am. They really seemed kind of disparate at the time, but as I have moved through my career, they've started to blend together. But I had a big divergence in the 90s. After I graduated college, I was kind of faced with do I want to pursue stand-up or do I want to go into research or what? And I thought, maybe I'll somehow do both. Maybe I'll go take classes at Second City and do a research job and learn about improv. But then in the summer, I had applied to law school. Yeah, this other thing that came up. So the interest in the law came about because my junior year of college, I studied philosophy, politics, and economics at Oxford. And I thought, wow, this is kind of a cool entree into law. These are the things we're studying issues that are relevant to how does society function? What's the role of the individual in the state? And where do rights start and stop? And what is justice? And all these things that I probably didn't really understand back then, but I thought they were interesting. And I thought, well, maybe law school. So I had applied. I got into Penn, but I deferred, thinking I would go to Chicago and do the improv and a research job. And then I got into UCLA off the wait list in July, 5 or 6 weeks before classes started. I was like, LA, comedy, here I go. Now, in Rochester, I had worked my way up to a middle act, but Rochester is a small market and it was great crowds, but it's a smaller market. So I was able to move more quickly, and LA was something altogether different. So I went to law school thinking I could do law school and I could do stand-up, and I thought I could do both well. I thought wrong. So I kind of did both of them half-assed. When you want to make it in any kind of creative career, whether it's stand-up or singing or art or anything, where you have to put yourself into that 150%, and you have to be out there all the time, and you have to work harder than anybody else. And I didn't appreciate that I needed to do that. I kind of thought, well, I have these great degrees and I should be able to just kind of start at the level that I was at in Rochester. Well, that was very naive of me to think that at that point. I ended up, I went through law. I did well in moot court because that was about performing and putting together arguments. I had always written my own material for stand-up. And, there's a persuasive element to comedy as well. So I know this is how I started to think of it as I grew and started to appreciate what I was doing. But like the stand up, you are crafting material. There's a logic and an analytical side to how jokes are formed, how jokes are structured. And you are persuading an audience in a way. You're getting them to laugh by setting up a premise and then taking them on a right turn, and they're like, oh, I didn't expect that. And that's, the laughter comes from that.
And how did performing shape the way that you listen, observe, and lead?
I think it starts with the writing. So when you're doing any sort of writing, you have to imagine, like, who am I writing it for? So you're thinking about who's in the audience. I have to imagine, what do they think is normal? What are their beliefs about something? And how do I kind of show that I understand that? That's empathy, to understand, like, where might the audience be coming from? And then I have to make that turn that I talked about. So I'm kind of leading them down a path. But in the preparation for writing jokes, so much of it is about observing how people behave, what they say, how they act in different situations. And it's a matter of trying to say, okay, let's synthesize this into something that's, digestible. And most importantly, it's got to be funny. So in terms of how I lead, I feel like that is such a great way to connect with people. I think over time, and I know I'm leaving out a big part of the bio, but over time, I've come to appreciate that the value I feel in performing is that I'm connecting with strangers. Like, that is the deeper feeling. Yes, there's the feeling of, look at me, isn't this funny, isn't this clever? And that's at one level. And I think certainly when I was younger, that was the most important part. But what I realized is that there's something deeper there, and that is that connection with others. Like, if you go to see comedy, you want to laugh. I mean, that's the first thing. It's got to happen. So, you're connected as a comedian. I'm trying to connect with all these strangers who are there to laugh. They may or may not know anything about each other other than the people that are with them, that evening, but they're all having this shared experience. And I think it's incumbent upon a comedian to make sure that that it's a night well spent, that they feel like somebody gets them. I think this idea of, right now, so many people feel distance from each other, but comedy is something that bonds people. And I know, people think of, well, what if I don't have that same exact background that you do? There are certain things that are funny, and you have to find those common grounds, those things that everybody has experienced and maybe never thought of in as much detail or in the way that you're talking about it. Seinfeld is so masterful at looking at nuance, and as just one example of what's involved there. But I feel like there is that. It's just a large amount of paying attention. That's really, it's paying attention to what's going on in society, how people relate, and then trying to refract that in a way that's like, oh, that's a point of view I hadn't thought about, and it was funny, it made me laugh.
Now, being on stage can be quite exposing. Did doing improv teach you anything about vulnerability, and how does that show up in your leadership today?
Yeah, I started doing improv in probably about, I guess it would be about 8 or 9 years after I started doing stand up. And it was not getting into an improv troupe freshman year at Cornell, this group called the Whistling Shrimp. I was crushed, but it was that I used that as impetus, like, oh, maybe not improv, but try stand up. But I had been kind of afraid of improv. I find it even more daunting. Like, a stand up, you've got a script and you can write and you can plan. Improv is you're completely vulnerable. You're completely exposed. You're working with others. You never know where it's going to go. That's what's exciting for the audience and can be terrifying for a performer. Improv performers will tell you, stand up seems so much harder. Stand up performers will say, improv seems so much harder. So for me, doing improv, and which was also sketch comedy, that gave me a chance to kind of expand and say, you know what, this is not something I feel like I've mastered or I'm really great at, but I want to go through this with my troupe mates and see what we can come up with. Working with colleagues, working with teammates, making them look good. That is such a key tenet of improv. There are a couple things, obviously, well, not obviously, but everybody these days is familiar, I would think, with yes and, this concept of building on something else. You accept somebody puts something out there and creating a story, and you accept it and you build as part of the story. Because if you negate it, if somebody says, oh, it's so nice to be back on the beach with you, and you say, the beach, we're standing in line at the bank, well, you've just killed the scene that your partner was trying to establish. But when you accept things and you also try to make them look good, you realize that it's not about you, that it's really very much a part of a team. And I think about that a lot in leadership, in the work that I do, whether it's running focus groups, whether it's leading facilitations. It's not about me. I'm there kind of as a catalyst, but it's much more. I personally get so much more satisfaction if I can elevate and empower the other people that are there. So, on stage, it's creating a scene that's funny and making somebody else, I'm going to step aside and, their character is getting the laughs. I'm okay with that. I'm fine playing a supporting role. That I don't think I, would have done. I'm sure I didn't do it the way it needed to be done when I first started out, but it's something that as I've matured, I think I appreciate and understand more as time goes on. And that, just like in terms of big picture of leadership and how I think a way to be effective is you want to bring others along and empower them to be, it's going to sound trite, to be the best they can be, to find their strengths, to find what sparks them. And if you can light that and help be part of that, that's really, really gratifying.
Now, I'd like to pivot into the creative research that you do now. You worked across so many industries and with so many people, from executives to everyday consumers. Do you remember your first major research project where you thought, yeah, this is what I'm meant to do?
I would say the one that probably had the biggest impact on me early on was a project I was part of a team for $2 Chuck, about $2 Chuck, and led me to that was my first foray into the wine industry. So the company that I worked for, BRS Group, amazing group of professionals, seasoned researchers. There was a team of people that was working on exploring the $2 Chuck phenomenon. So within the wine industry, there were a lot of naysayers thinking that this is just a fad, this is going away, this is, it's cheap, and that's all there is to it, and not worried about it. But our company had said, wait, and they had done a lot of wine research. I think I had been there, I had contracted, been there about a year and a half. But they said there's more to this here. Let's explore this phenomenon. We did a quantitative study and we did a qualitative study, and they let me, wasn't my first project, but it was among the first projects that I led, and ran focus groups on this, talking with these different wine consumers about their experience of $2 Chuck. And it's one thing to hear what the industry had to say at that point, but it's another when you talk to the people who are consuming the product. And glowing reviews at that point about the quality. The being inexpensive means you could drink that on a Tuesday and a Wednesday, and then have the good stuff on a Saturday or Sunday. But $2 Chuck at the time some people did see it as the good stuff. It was beating $60 wines at the time in some taste tests. So what was interesting is that this idea of there are rules for wine. Well, wine is something that you're just supposed to enjoy. Why would there have to be rules? So that dichotomy, that kind of tension there, I thought was really fascinating, and my colleagues did too. And I mean, I learned so much by observing how they were thinking about it, and then working that into my own thought process. And that the idea that people would be like, well, I like the wine. It doesn't matter what experts tell me to do. This is about what I like. And I thought that was a really fascinating and important thing to consider, when you're doing research. It's like, well, the company that's making the product or producing or offering the service may think about their customers in a certain way, but you don't really know until you talk to them and you observe them. You could go to Trader Joe's in those days, and in the back of people would open their trunks and the Mercedes 7 Series and stuff cases of $2 Chucks or whatever the car of the day was. $2 Chuck there too. So you're like, okay, this is not like just for people who don't want to spend a lot of money on wine. This is for people who just they just want this mix. And I thought that whole thing was really fascinating. So I was able to work on the project, the quant, the qual, and then to present it. along with my with colleagues Tom Restaino and Bob Kenny, who was in PR, and we got to go out and talk about this in wine industry events, and it was a perspective that people weren't hearing. Well, this caught the attention of a couple guys in France who ran a conference called Wine Evolution, and they invited me to go speak to them about Tubak Chuck, and it was like totally caught me off guard. And my colleagues at work were, the senior partners were like, Mark, you should go do this. And I am forever grateful that they enabled me to do that. But it was very well received. And here I am, this complete neophyte in this setting. And it felt really good to get to do this, to share information, and to also kind of be a voice of consumers wasn't always heard. Are you really hearing what your customers are saying, or are you hearing what your competitors or customers are saying about that other product and the reason that they're not buying more of yours? And that sparked a lot of interest and an appreciation for what I was doing. So that's a large part of, I don't know, the satisfaction and kind of the big picture of what I see in the work that I do.
Well, let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll explore how Mark bridges creativity and insight in some of his most unconventional work. We'd love for you to be a part of the Expressions of Leadership community. Follow us wherever you get your podcasts and connect with us on Instagram and YouTube at Expressions of Leadership. Welcome back to Expressions of Leadership. I'm Michele Kawamoto Perry, and I'm here with Marc Engel, comic strategist and creative facilitator. Let's get into how he turns conversation into co-creation. Now, you've talked about how people don't always say what they mean, or even know what they think or feel. How do you lead in a world where clarity is often clouded?
I think you try to meet people where they are if you are actually in a leadership role, and kind of get level set and see where they're coming from. And I think I do that also in focus groups and conversations there. Somebody may say, well, I don't mean to say that this car reminds me of, I don't know, it makes me think of something that's broken down on the side of the road, from the movies in the 70s, or whatever random thing they might say. As soon as somebody says, it's not that, or I don't mean to say, or I'm not saying, you're like, no, there's something there about that very thing. There's some association there. Even though you said it's not that, the fact that it came up, there is something there. So you're kind of like gently peeling into it. I don't try to put people on the spot, and I'm not grilling them the way a lawyer would, if he is interrogating a witness and trying to find inconsistencies. That's not what it's about, but it's trying
Although
to
you could
listen.
do that just because of the
Good.
fact that, you do have that law background.
I could just pull out that JD and which really that may be something I could do with it, because I'm really not using it on a daily basis, but it could be just for intimidation. I haven't thought about that. Sometimes I use it at restaurants. I call and go, reservation for Dr. Engel. Oh, really? What kind of doctor? Juris doctor. Yes. But I think, to try to, sometimes the clarity comes not in a direct, like somebody doesn't always say the very thing that they mean, but when you piece together all these different components, things that they have revealed about their background, about the reactions to something that you're showing, maybe you did a walkthrough in a store with them, you're getting a sense of who they are and what they think and how they feel and how they react. So you kind of piece things together. There's a bit of amateur psychologists, sociologists, anthropologists at play here, in trying to understand, especially for the things that are not being said, the nuances. In a group, when somebody is listening to somebody else and they raise an eyebrow or they look away or shake their head, I try to pick up on that and go, wait a second, it looks like you may have a different point of view on this. Again, not trying to say one's right or one's wrong, but I want to make sure I understand what you were reacting to. And back to I don't know, I guess it's back to the vulnerability question in a way as well. The fact that I am asking, I'm saying, like, I don't know everything. I want to make sure I'm understanding and pull on that thread to find out, like, what was going on there. Teach me. I'm here to learn from you. Teach me. So I don't think that I have all the answers, but I want to be paying attention when people are giving little glimpses of answers, and you're like, there may be a little thread to pull on. I want to see what's going on there. And sometimes it goes a little bit off topic, but then there's a story that comes out, and you're like, wow, that was very elucidating. And you might not have expected that. So that idea, again, the improv comes into play, where you have to kind of be limber and ready to move in whatever direction based on the things not only that people are saying, but also what they're not saying, but somehow otherwise signaling.
Well, circling back to that vulnerability piece, you make people feel safe enough to share very personal things, even about health and beauty and even politics. How do you create that kind of space?
I think when I start, I always preface, and most researchers will do this when you're starting a conversation. You preface this by saying basically there are no wrong answers. Some people like to say there are no right or wrong answers, and I guess I think everything in some way is a right answer. So I usually just focus. There are no wrong answers. I really encourage you to be candid. And I know, sometimes I'll say, I know we're going to be, we're talking about sensitive issues that we might not be used to talking about in here, but the very fact that you're here, I want you to feel empowered to share your point of view. And if it's just a one-on-one interview, that's often easier because it's just me. They're not trying to match up with somebody else. Sometimes you'll be in a room and people have differing opinions, and then I have to kind of gently mediate. So a law skill as well, mediate how something might go. But even in a one-on-one conversation, to create a safe space, there's I signal. I think I do this is with my eyes, probably with my hands, with my gestures. I would be tough in $100,000 pyramid having to sit on my hands like that. But you gesture, you show concern, and that is me. I mean, like I really, when I'm in a room with somebody asking, I really get immersed in that, and I want to know, how are you feeling and how are you thinking about this, and not judging. And it's harder online. I've got you high on my screen near my camera, so I think I'm pretty much you may see me kind of looking at you, but I've got to watch how you're reacting. And if you show any sign of shutting down in any way, I try to pull back, and the gears are going and saying, what can I do differently? How can I make this person feel more comfortable? There's a side of it, like my client has hired me to do this, so I need to get this done. But I always start with the dignity of the person that is sharing their time. And yes, they're paid respondents, they get paid for their time. That's just how research works. But people, when they share something that exposes them, or that they would feel vulnerable about, or is contentious, they're really putting themselves out there. And I want to honor that they've come into this space to be honest and not to be judged. And then I will ask follow-up questions because I'm driven by the curiosity, like tell me more about that is a phrase that they'll teach you in moderator school. But really that the idea underlying it is, I want to know more. I want to understand more. And, I feel like a good focus group is one. Well, there are many things that would qualify as a good focus group, but one of the standards is when people say, that was a really great experience. I feel like, I got to share my point of view, and that I learned from other people. And, why aren't there more spaces in civil society where you can, or civic society, I guess, where you can, uncivil sometimes, where you can have that opportunity to interact with each other and just listen. We're so often at each other's throats. I feel like in some small way, when I have these focus groups, like I'm just demonstrating the kind of way I'd like the world to to behave, on a more regular basis in conversation, where we could really try to understand each other. Because one thing that in this ties back to the comedy, everybody's suffering. Everybody is suffering in some way. I mean, we should have seen this so strongly in these last since the pandemic, especially, but everything else, all the other changes that have come about through technology and political turmoil and everything else. We should be more sympathetic and empathetic to each other, but we're yelling at each other. We're talking just inside our echo chambers. So when I have the opportunity to just have a normal, what I would call a normal conversation, where there's back and forth and giving people a chance to be heard, I feel like that's such an important thing to do, even just for those 90 minutes or 2 hours.
And you also, as you mentioned, bring humor into your work, whether it's interviews, workshops, or even teaching. What role does humor play in how you build trust and influence? And how do you use it in high stakes environments without losing credibility or focus?
Mm. Well, I think it's absolutely integral. Like for me, it works. I wouldn't say, that it absolutely works the same for everybody else. But when I'm running a group, when I'm running a focus group, when I'm leading a meeting, facilitating a workshop, or anything like that, that is my natural style. And if I'm not being myself, and it's going to come across as very stilted, and then nobody else will feel like they're going to be able to be themselves. So I'm kind of modeling that and saying, hey, this is a safe place to play. Uh, Play is, there's a fine line between play and attack, right? Like, there's this great video that I use sometimes when I'm presenting on humor, and it's from the BBC. And it's about bonobos and how they play a lot with each other, and they like tickle each other and knock each other over. But there's some signal, like there's an unwritten rule of where the lines are, and if it were to cross that line, they're like, okay, you've gone too far, and now it becomes an affront, and then you're on the defensive in a fighting mode. I want to make sure, I feel like by using humor, I am setting the example to say, we are here to play in a metaphorical way. That, you know, what I'm doing, what we're talking about is serious, but if something funny comes up, I'm gonna jump on it. Like if somebody says something and I think of a quip that is, I have to run through, I have to cycle through and go, is this going to be offensive? Is this going to be okay? If it's okay, I will share it. I want to make sure that I'm responding because I think that helps lighten the mood. Humor is a tension release, and so much of what we study is like, where are the tensions in people's lives? Well, for the process of understanding that, using humor in any sort of conversation is like this. I can let my, I don't want to say let my guard down because that could sound, there we go. I just said, I don't want to say, but I do mean let your guard down, at least to some degree. You are diffusing a situation to say, okay, we're gonna bring down. It doesn't mean we're not talking about something serious, but it's that like the way we're going to do it, there's a lightness to it. And I think there's an interesting, I don't know, an interesting paradox here with humor, that it is like you have to be really grounded in order to understand what's going on with other people, to connect with them, and to feel this sense of understanding, and like you want to be down to earth. I'm here to listen to you. But there's also there's a lightness to it, and then kind of an elevating force too, that it's like we're grounded, but we don't want to be too heavy that we're locked into the ground. If we have a lightness, we're able to move a little more fluidly. And it's not a matter of just asking a question, getting one answer, and moving on. We're going to be in the flow of a conversation, just like people talk about being in flow states for whatever creative activity or anything that you love to do. You kind of lose yourself in it. For me, having incorporating humor in there starts to set that in motion, that we can have this free flowing conversation. You asked about what about like higher stakes situations, and how do you use humor there? That comes from experience. So when I'm in a business situation, I am not going to I'm not going to put comedy first. Like I have to make the joke, I have to make them laugh at the expense of what are we there for? But I can use it to help us get there in a way that is more pleasant, more fun. Like if we have fun, you're probably going to have a better outcome. I have to show respect as well, and if there's something humorous that I'm making a comment from their point of view, that demonstrates that they've been heard. So it does have value there. But I'm not going to be frivolous, and there are just times and places you just have to kind of sense when it's right or wrong, and I think that certainly comes with age.
You really seem to genuinely embrace curiosity, which is the kryptonite, if you will, to judgment.
I would say just the idea of play that kids do naturally, and the sense of wonder. And if you can have a sense of wonder, you're probably less likely to come at it with your preordained set of this is how it is, this is how I see things. By having a sense of curiosity or wonder, you're like, huh, I'm one person out of 8 billion people, or whatever the number is now. Maybe I don't know it all, or maybe there are other ways of looking at things. And that's the part that is really fascinating to me. And again, like I have my point of view. I can make jokes. I can write really, tight jokes or acerbic jokes if I want. But in the setting of research, it's much more about like, huh, look at what this person thinks. I wonder what they feel. Wonder what their experience has been.
We're going to take a brief pause, and when we return, we'll dig into how Mark's out of focus groups and blocks and clay approach creates space for surprising breakthroughs. Stay with us. By partnering with Expressions of Leadership, you'll reach an audience of professionals passionate about leadership and growth. For sponsorship opportunities, please contact us at letstalk@expressionsofleadership.com. Welcome back to Expressions of Leadership. I'm Michele Kawamoto Perry, and I'm here with Marc Engel. We're talking about creativity, insight, and the power of play in serious business. Tell us about out of focus groups and how it flips the traditional research model. Where did the idea come from?
So out of focus groups is something that I came up with when I went on my own. So I've had my own research company since 2010. And in the first couple months, I had a client, a wine client, that wanted to come up with ideas for a marketing program for, I guess, the next summer, or I believe that's what it was. And they said, we could do a focus group and talk to consumers, but let's just see. The goal is to get these ideas out there for a wine program. So I am very grateful because she kind of gave me carte blanche. I said, I think I can use my improv background, and there are certain games that we can play that can help, shake up the soil, or till the soil, I guess would be the right metaphor, and to come up with new ideas for things. The concept, the reason I called it out of focus groups, is that sometimes, like if you're trying to solve a problem, you can get laser focused on it, and by being laser focused on it, you may miss other things that are around it. Right? Like if you keep a little bit more of a gauzy look and say, what if we go this direction? What if we twist it? What if we expand it? What if we flip it upside down? What might come of it? That's what you do in comedy, in terms of thinking about other perspectives. And this is really what it's about, is coming up with new perspectives. But by playing games, by incorporating, I say games because that's ultimately what they are. Some clients would rather call them exercises or activities, because they may get scared of the idea of improv. But I think, we improvise all the time in our lives, but we don't always feel empowered to use it in a work setting. So for this first group, we brought together people. It was, I think, the president of the company, the VP of marketing who had come in from overseas. You had a producer. I'm not going to remember everybody. You had somebody who was on the production side of things, somebody on the distribution side for the brand, somebody from the creative design agency, and you get all these brilliant minds together, people with different perspectives. And there was a chef from Just Desserts. One of the judges, excuse me, from Just Desserts was on there. And her perspective was amazing as well. You're coming at it from all these different ways. When you have a chance, if you're trying to come up with ideas, you want to bring in as many different points of view as possible to look at this, to see what could it be? And then you were minimizing the chance of missing something. So thus the idea of being a little bit out of focus. So while you're generating these ideas, and by playing, what happens is you are embodying things as you go along. It's a very different thing to ask somebody a question. What do you think of a particular brand? That's very different from saying, okay, you're going to go on stage and play this brand. So this was something that was very unexpected that came out of an out of focus group. In that, and I'm just using that that particular one as an example, the president of the company and somebody who was on the distribution side played a brand. One of them played their brand, one of them played the competitor brand, and the things that came to light about both brands were just remarkable. And they both said they had never had theater experience, but they were so realistic and they felt so in the moment, and they just kind of embodied what these brands were like. And that helped people see, like, oh, that's where we're different. These are different things that help us separate ourselves. I mean, like, I thought I was watching a paid improv, and these were people who supposedly hadn't done improv before. And I think that's another thing, back to the idea of empowering people. We're playing these games. It's not about performing. When you're using, this is applied improvisation. It's not about performing. It's about no judgment. It's about making your partner look good. It's about embodying whatever it is that you're going through. And that's where the magic happens. I knew you were going to ask about, you mentioned blocks and clay. Out of focus groups was where I started with it. Blocks and clay is what evolved from when my partner, Pascal Patinode, who's up in Montreal, he had been doing something in parallel. He is an actor in Canada, and he had been doing almost the same kind of thing, and unbeknownst to each other initially. And they were like, "Well, let's do this kind of thing together." So it's a solution that we offer that is it's rooted in play, and that's really the idea. Like when you think about who doesn't like to play, we're all retired children. We're all retired children. And I think sometimes you just have to come out of retirement and get in touch with that playful side. Somebody could say, "Oh, it seems very frivolous. So how are we spending our time here and our money?" But it actually makes a difference because you are in a more relaxed state. Look at the way kids interact. They show curiosity about things. They figure out how to, make rules to make things happen. You're just going. You're out of your head and you're into your body. And when you're into your body and it's more embodied, you're going to get deeper and find things that you might not have otherwise found.
What can organizational leaders learn and apply from this kind of improvisational creative thinking with their own teams?
Think there are a number of things. One is that everybody in your organization has something to contribute. So one of the things I really love about this is that you can pull together people from different parts of an organization. And you asked about consumers. Sometimes we'll pull consumers in as well. But I feel like you start with everybody can be part of the solution, and it all evens out too. Back to the vulnerability. If you're going to put yourself out there and do these exercises, there's a chance you might look silly, but that's part of it. That's part of the whole process. One of the teachers from the Applied Improvisation Network, and I'm having a complete brain freeze, and she's in Western Massachusetts, and she's wonderful. But she wrote an article called "The Great Spirit of." You're gonna have to bleep this out, but the great spirit of it. Sometimes you go in, you're like, I am going to take a chance, and if I stumble, if I make a mistake, if I violate the rules of the game, well, that's okay in that moment. It's very freeing to get that stuff out of the way so that you can start coming up with new ideas and getting past the same old, same old. Like if you want to do things the way you've always done it, you're not going to want this kind of creative approach. But if you are willing to say, I wonder what would happen if we tried something a little bit differently. And even if you're willing to ask that question, it's a what if question, then you're already signaling in some way that you are curious about other ways of doing things. And I think if you want to make change, you've got to try something a little bit different. So you take a chance on something that's a little bit more creative and fun. I mean, I think there's also every time we do these things, there's a team building element to it. So at a minimum, and it's never just the minimum, but I would say at a minimum, people are bonding with each other in a way, certainly with all the work from home and remote and hybrid, they don't get to do that as often. You're not in the same physical space, but boy, we realized how much we miss being with each other, uh, and things that can happen, things that can evolve when you're in the presence of somebody else and you're working together for something. And especially if you're coming from diverse perspectives, and that can be diverse based on your demographics and your background and where you were raised and what your ethnicity and religion and all of the and gender and age and all of those things. And it can also be diversity of experiences. How do you look at the world? What do you do as a designer? What do you do as an accountant? What do you do as on the production line? There's so many different ways of thinking and being. And I think that's something that over the course of my career, I've really come to appreciate and value and see the joy of that. Is like if everybody can feel that and feel like, hey, I'm worth something. The way I see the world matters and I'm contributing to something bigger. All of that to me leads to like a better experience and probably better business decisions ultimately.
Well, we'll be back in just a moment. Up next, Mark opens up about challenges, failures, and the moments that pushed him to grow. You won't want to miss it. True transformation starts from within. The Forward Project partners with organizations to create meaningful culture shifts and develop leaders who inspire real change. If your team is ready to move forward with purpose, visit www.theforwardproject.co. And we're back on Expressions of Leadership. I'm Michele Kawamoto Perry, and I'm here with Marc Engel. We've covered comedy and creativity. Now let's talk about resilience. Can you share a moment when something went sideways? Maybe it was a creative session or a business decision or maybe a performance. And how did you recover from that?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind for resilience is just kind of how my life unfolded. So this was became a major inflection point. So this is the summer of 2001. So I was doing improv. I was doing some stand-up, open mics and showcases at clubs and bookstores, things like that. And we were just about to get married, and I was like, I don't feel like I have a lot of control over my life. Like I'm tired of waiting on other people. I knew like we're getting married, we're going to want to start a family, and my wife is from the Bay Area, and we decided, we were going to move up to the Bay Area. I got a job in research with Harris Interactive, which had merged with my company in Rochester. So I became an e-commerce analyst in 1999, and because like everybody else, I was an expert in e-commerce in 1999. I worked with them. I worked with another research company that was a subsidiary of Amazon. And then for whatever reason, our research group got siphoned off to another company that I won't name. And it was a horrid experience. And 10 of the 12 of us were let go at the end of summer of 2001. So you had that on August 31st. 9/11 happened. I fortunately didn't know anybody personally who was killed in that event, but obviously that affected everybody. But so here I am, no job. 9/11 happens, and a week later, we found out we were expecting our first child after having tried for a year, and I was like, oh my, time to get serious. Figure out what am I going to do to make a living and to help take care of the family. So I had to kind of dig deep and kind of temporarily set aside some of those creative aspirations, which was already starting to happen, and try to figure out what do I want to do. And that's what eventually led me to qualitative research, because I didn't want to completely abandon the creative side. And so I had the research, but I was doing mostly quantitative. I worked with a career counselor. She was amazing. And she said, have you thought about qualitative research? And I was like, no. I said, I just want to be able to use my creative background where it's an asset. And she said, I think this is it. In the fall of 2001, that was not a great time to be looking for a job. I sent out a bunch of cold call, if you will, or cold emails, and I got responses from the majority of them. And then one company, the BRS group, said, maybe, we talked, and they say, you may just be crazy enough to work here. But I had the resilience came from like, oh my gosh, I have no job right now, and we have a family on the way, and the whole world has changed. What do I do? How do I dig in? And I think the lesson that I took away from it that has helped me be resilient in other situations is that there are so many things that are beyond your control. I could control none of those three things. I mean, expecting our first child, I had a small role in that, but so did our fertility doctor. So it was just a mindset shift. And by accepting that things that I couldn't control, it made me feel like, okay, if I can set that aside and just focus on, I know this sounds trite, but focus on the things that I could control and let the other things go, or work with them, like in martial arts, work with the momentum or the energy of your sparring partner or your opponent, then you might be able to come to a better place. And I feel like that helped me lighten my attitude about a lot of things. And now, like, I think, it's been 25 years, and I feel like I take a much more considered point of view, and try to put things in perspective more, and try to keep things light and understand there's certain things that are going to happen, accept those. How do we work with those? We often work better when we have restrictions or structures to work within. And that, just kind of that principle. And it also helps, like when I talk to students, I find that to be very liberating for people, because there's so much pressure, understandably so, on students to get it right while you're in college. You got to have it all figured out. You got to know what you're going to major in and where this is going to take you step by step. I have such a circuitous path to where where I've settled in. I try to help people keep that in perspective and say, like, don't get caught up. Think, focus on the things that you can control, focus on what you're good at, what you like, and try to follow the path and understand you may drive in one direction and have to reverse it and go in another direction. Hopefully it's not like the scene in Austin Powers where he's driving the forklift and there's like no room to maneuver. Hopefully it's not that tight, but sometimes you just have to change things, and to be more comfortable with change and adapt to it, which I think, from my limited understanding of Darwin, that's what survival is adapting to change. I think having that resilience and being willing to let go of some of those things is really helpful and very freeing.
Now, every leader, no matter how seasoned, faces moments of doubt. And imposter syndrome is more common than we admit. What do you lean on when those moments of self-doubt creep in?
What I try to rely on is to try to just take a moment, try to pause. And if it's in the middle of a performance, which has happened, where you kind of just like you freeze. And I was like, oh my goodness, where was I and what I wanted to talk about? I'm not memorizing a script at this point. I don't memorize full scripts. I have jokes, I have transitions and things I want to cover. But sometimes they're just like, I have completely lost my train of thought. How do I get that back? And then there's a moment where you're like, breath, maybe sit down if that's part of it, like do some kind of motion, try to make it seamless, and try to remember that the audience generally doesn't know what's happening, so you have a little bit of wiggle room to play around and make it seem like it's intentional. And I know one issue I have is, as you may have noticed, I talk a lot and I talk fast. Sometimes with the jokes, if I talk too fast, people will miss them and I'm on to the next thing. So I try to remember, if I can slow down the pace, then it's almost like an orchestra piece where there are different movements and there's different tempo and maybe different volume at different times. And other times you're bringing it way down. If I can try to use those moments of panic to say, I'm on a pause, I'm shifting here. What is it that I want to say? What do I want to, what do I want to do? How do I get back on track? And sometimes just that moment, like almost let a wave wash over me. And I'm like, okay, here's something. And it may not have been the thing that I was originally planning to talk about, but if it's something that is still on track, I'll go with it. Or if it feels, sometimes I will be self-effacing. I don't know if that's always the best situation, but if it's clear that I have messed up, I am not afraid to say, I just completely brain froze there. It's sometimes like, again, like if you do it too much self-deprecating humor, unless that's your complete style, like Rodney Dangerfield, that was his whole persona. But I feel like people, when they're watching somebody, like, he can laugh at himself. That makes it a little easier for me to join the conversation. And when I'm on a stage, it is a conversation. Paul Simon has this great quote that the audience completes the song, the audience completes the joke as well for a comedian. And just try to remember, like, if I have established enough rapport and there's kind of an implied relationship, they want you to do well. They want to come along with you. If I'm being personable and I've made them laugh, they'll give you a little room to go, oh, we kind of saw him in a real moment when he screwed up. And you can work with that. And sometimes that's even better, because then you're like, it's kind of like when you watch watch SNL and the Weekend Update, and Michael Che and Colin just crack each other up and they kind of break that fourth wall. Or when Amy Poehler and Tina Fey did it, also incredible. It just helps people relate. They're like, they're human. This performer is human. He's made a mistake. I think that's true with leaders as well. I think a deeply underappreciated value of leadership is humility, and like being able to laugh at yourself and being able to say, I don't know everything. I make mistakes once in a while. You still have to have the gravitas and enough charisma and enough sense of, like, we're going in this direction for a shared goal. You've got to have that in order for people to follow and stay with you. But I think if you show that human side, it just makes you more relatable. And I think as long as you're being respectful of people and trying to draw out the best in them, they'll give more too. If you're working towards a goal and you're trying to achieve something, as your team, the company, people want to work, people want to accomplish and be part of something bigger than themselves, and they want to feel like they matter.
Your career has certainly taken some bold turns. What keeps you open to reinvention?
I think the idea of surviving and knowing that, like, if I don't change, I'm going to fall behind. All this talk about AI, and we've been having this is so much of the focus now. I'm like, well, I've got to figure out how to integrate it in here. And if I ignore it completely, then I'm going to be like, okay, I'm probably going to be left behind. So some of it is just understanding that that's basic survival. I also want to be relevant to either, to my clients. I want to be relevant to the participants when I'm coming in to talk. Like, I pride myself on being able to talk with people from pretty much any walk of life, any age, any perspective. And I'm not going to be, it's not going to be perfect for everybody, but I feel like I am open enough because I'm willing to, I don't know if it's reinvention or if it's just a matter of staying open, but I'm willing to say, like, teach me, guide me, show me. I'm curious about where you're going. So part of reinventing myself is like, what's next? Another thing about reinvention, I would say, is just staying relevant. And I want to make sure that I can continue in my work as long as I am capable of doing it. And in order to do that, because it's so important for me to stay in touch with people and be a voice for people, I have to constantly reinvent myself, my understanding of how society works, how technology works, how human interaction is evolving or changing based on all of this, while also, the one thing that I would want to maintain is that human dignity piece of it along the way.
Well, we're going to take one final break. And when we come back, Mark shares what legacy means to him, the kind of leadership he hopes his kids will embrace or challenge. And we'll close, as always, with a little wisdom and whimsy. Don't miss a thing. Follow Expressions of Leadership on your favorite podcast app and connect with us on Instagram and YouTube at Expressions of Leadership. You're listening to Expressions of Leadership. I'm your host, Michele Kawamoto Perry, and I'm here with Marc Engel, and we're heading into our final segment where we reflect on legacy, give some advice, and then end on a fun note. Now, Marc, you've spent over 25 years helping others find insight, connection, and clarity. What does legacy look like to you?
I would say probably focusing on kindness and respect for everybody that you come across, recognizing the dignity in all other people. You don't know what somebody's going through. You should assume best intent, give people the benefit of the doubt, and try to, from unless they've proven otherwise, show that kind of grace and understanding and curiosity. And you're not going to like or love everybody, but at a minimum you can find some way to connect. What is something you can connect on with somebody else? It could be superficial in that moment, and that's okay. That's so much of what life is. And I think that that sense of respect for others is just really crucial. And it bothers me if the times if and when I've failed to do that, I feel like I let somebody down. I let that person down if I didn't give them that. And I would love, and I feel my wife and I feel very proud that our kids do that and that they have embraced that, and that gives us a lot of joy. So in terms of legacy, just not to put too much pressure on the kids, but just the kids being good human beings, menschy.
And as a father, what kind of leadership are you modeling for your kids? Or maybe even hoping that they're going to challenge?
A lot of strict corporal punishment. No, just kidding. Um, I mean, they're both out of the house. One's a senior in college. One is already out of college. Obviously, not in that order. No, not obviously not in that order. Anyway, they're on their own. They're doing their own thing. I hope they challenge. They hope they challenge me. If they want to call BS, if I say something and they're like, "Yeah, but you told us the exact opposite thing, or you're not living that way," be like, "Yeah, you caught me." I want them to challenge, to pursue truth. I mean, again, like, comedy is about telling the truth. They keep it real, and they call my wife and me out on something. I'm like, okay, that's reasonable. Uh, I want them to think for themselves, though. I mean, other than respect and kindness and dignity, I want them to have their own paths and what works for them, and where they find meaning and what they find interesting, and what they're curious about, the people they want to associate with. I want them to do their own thing, whether that's challenging me or not. I mean, I feel like we like our kids, our kids' friends. We're very fortunate, so I feel like in some ways that's very similar, but different musical tastes, different styles of dress. But as far as like leadership, they challenge my leadership. I don't feel like I'm a co-leader with my wife. And as we speak, I think the kids are probably planning to take over the family, hostile takeover of the family. I have no idea.
So, Marc, if people are curious about you and your services, how can they find out more?
You can go to onemarkengel.com and you can check out my LinkedIn profile. I have a few random things here and there that are Vimeo or YouTube somewhere, but I'll try to organize that and make sure those are available.
Well, we always end with a little wisdom and whimsy. First, the wisdom. What's a mindset, mantra, or quote that's guided you in your leadership that might help someone else who is contemplating an untraditional path?
A couple things come to mind. One is, and again, sorry for the bleeping, but don't be an that's one. Lighten up. I think that's another one. Embrace paradox. I would say, two things that seem to be opposites can be true at the same time and accept that. And then there's a great quote from Robin Williams. He was one of my absolute favorites because of the pathos and the heart that he gave in his performances, and just the most ridiculously funny human being, and kind. He said, "Angels have wings because they take themselves lightly," and I like that a lot. And my last name happens to mean angel, so it has a little extra resonance for me.
And now for the fun question. Who would play you in a movie about your life?
Who I would want to play me? Well, I guess I would probably first say Billy Crystal, because when I was in LA, I actually auditioned for Mr. Saturday Night. They needed a young version of the Buddy Young Jr. character that he was playing. So this was like the second month out in California, and I went on my first movie audition. And I was a little older than the part that they would play, and I don't know. I'm sure there are myriad other reasons that it didn't move forward. But he always embodied, like I said with Robin Williams, heart and humor. That combination is so powerful to me, and there's also such a playfulness to his humor. He's like he jabs, he pokes a little, but there's always like a heart behind it and a silliness, and love behind it.
Well, Mark, thank you for joining us on Expressions of Leadership. You've shown us that leadership doesn't always have to be so serious or strict. It can be funny, it can be flexible, and deeply human. And that's a lesson we all need.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for those kind words and for the opportunity to share this conversation with you. Thank you.
And to our listeners, thank you for spending time with us. If this conversation resonated with you, please share it with a friend, subscribe to the show, or drop us a note. Until next time, keep listening, keep questioning, and keep leading in your own voice. If you haven't done so already, make sure to click on that follow button so you don't miss out on future episodes. Have a guest you'd like us to interview? Questions, ideas, or just want to say hello? You can reach us at letstalk@expressionsofleadership.com or connect with us on Instagram or YouTube. We'd love to hear from you. And as always, thanks to our amazing team behind the scenes for making this podcast possible, including our sound engineer, Graham Palmer, and my chief encourager and advisor, Jeremiah Higgins.